Hey!
Doch, überhaupt bitte doch. Oh! So, das ist jetzt kein Sauber, aber das ist auch. Alter, das ist doch richtig gut. Ja, sag's nicht. Ja, ja, ja.
Ja, ich bin noch der Livestream am Umschalten, nur mal
Das ist schade, das ist doch viel.
Hey Thomas, can you hear me? Hey Thomas, can you hear me? Hey Thomas, can you hear me? Moment. Moment.
Mittlerweile ein bisschen mehr, weil ich jetzt die Masterarbeit, aber erstmal 2 Monate nicht verstanden. Überhaupt nicht.
Das ist schon viel.
Ja.
Zusätzliche Diagnose, eine zusätzliche
Hi everybody, the presentation will start soon. Please keep sharing the link. Hi everybody, the presentation will start soon. Please keep sharing the link. Hi everybody, the presentation will start soon. Please keep sharing the link.
Jo, ein alter Bart hat natürlich Deutsch in 3 Wochen Essensrückstände. Also ja, das ist am schlimmsten. So eine ist alle ja. Das ist ja viel besser. Ja, das ist schlimmsten. So eine ist der hoch. Du sitzt hoch und ist hoch. Das ist ja viel besser. Ja, nein, das kommt das schon. Das ist überhaupt kein Thema. Hast du das gedacht, dass das mal so eine Musik durchbieten irgendwie. Ach, das ist eine Frage, weil das nicht nötig ist, glaube ich.
Ein Wunder, dass ich kein Geld habe, gell? Wenn Sie da uns lassen, ja, ein hohes Besuch. Ja.
Ja, das soll es mit so Bilder sich auch normal vormachen, dass die Familie gesehen haben. Ja, das soll es mit so Bilder sich ja, vor allem so gut zugänglich ist der Unterschied. Mit dem Velo von Basel 10 Minuten beschäftigen und alles wieder Waldfahren. Ja, sogar wenn wir so gut zugänglich Muttenz, ja, genau. Das ist noch gar nicht schlecht. Und Sport ist schon gut für günstig. Auf jeden Fall finden.
Ja.
Ja.
Aber bitte ist noch nicht ganz
Hat er geantwortet?
Er hat am Morgen geschrieben, dass er
Hi, Niki. Hi, Niki. Ich habe ihm bestimmt deinen Skype-Namen mitgeteilt, Simham. Ich habe mein Skype-Profil mitgeteilt. Ich habe ihm bestimmt deinen Skype-Namen mitgeteilt, Simham. Ich habe es nicht. Mein Skype-Profil mitgeteilt. Da ist das Mail vom 8. Mai. Ich habe es nicht. Wo ich alles mitgeteilt habe, dass ich weiß. Aber er hat seine nie mitgeteilt. Da ist das Mail vom 8. Juli, wo ich alles mitgeteilt habe, was ich weiß. Aber er hat seine nie mitgeteilt.
Nein, wir warten noch Head of Department. Und da kommt jetzt
How are you? Fine, thank you. So, Claudio is nearly ready for his presentation. So what I propose is that I put my laptop so that you can see and hopefully follow Claudio's presentation. Then at the end you can ask questions. So if you have any problems with following or not seeing, please let me know. Yeah, you will do the presentation. Is it okay for you, Nico?
Ist das dein Sound?
Hm?
Ist das dein Sound, den wir nicht hören können? Das ist von meinem.
Okay, welcome everybody, welcome Ted. We are looking forward to your presentation, about 20 minutes and then
Yeah, thank you very much. Hi everybody and welcome to my master thesis presentation. I conducted my master thesis at the Delft University of Technology, that's in the Netherlands. The title of my thesis is Step Towards Aberration Corrections for Transcranial Ultrasound, Estimation of Skull Thickness and Speed of Sound. Transcranial ultrasound is ultrasound imaging that is performed through the human skull, usually here at the temporal bone. First, I would like to give you a brief introduction to the topic. I will describe the clinical need and the state of the art. Then I will describe the challenges and how we would like to address them. I will talk about the methods and results which are combined for the sake of time. I will describe the experimental setup, then the first method which is based on pulse echo signals, the second method which is based on the dispersion curves of Lamb waves, and the algebraic reconstruction technique. Then I will show how the adaptive beamforming can benefit from my results. Finally, I will conclude and discuss the results. There are several neurological disorders, usually oftentimes related to the motor system, for example, Parkinson's disease. We can address them with deep brain stimulation. Deep brain stimulation is where you implant an electrode into the patient's head. Sometimes it's only one electrode, sometimes it's two electrodes. And by applying a small electrical current, the symptoms of such disorders can be moderated. Now there are other disorders, for example depression, which can be addressed with deep brain stimulation. And depending on the disorder, different anatomical structures within the patient's head have to be addressed. Now, of course, the surgeon who performs the operation wants to see what he does. And he wants to confirm the correct placement of the electrode. State of the art to do that is X-ray or MRI intraoperatively. But there's also ultrasound, and ultrasound has many advantages. It is fast, cheap, it's portable, and harmless compared to X-ray or MRI. But there are also challenges for transcranial ultrasound. The high speed of sound of the human skull has aberrating effects on the ultrasound. To correct for that, we would have to measure the thickness of the skull and its speed of sound, especially because there are variations within the patients. The proposed method to do that would be the method based on pulse echo signals, another method based on lamb waves, and the algebraic reconstruction technique. With this technique, we could implement a map of speed of sound. The probe would be here. This is the lateral direction, and this here is the axial direction. Here you can see a slab of 2,200 meters per second, the speed of sound. This could be the skull. Here we have an area of 1,500 meters per second, which would be the brain. Now this map of speed of sound, you can use this for adaptive beamforming. But what is beamforming, you may ask? A beamformer is an algorithm which takes the ultrasound data and reconstructs an image out of it. The most commonly used beamformer is called delay and sum. But such a beamformer like delay and sum assumes a constant speed of sound for the insonified medium. It does not consider variations of the speed of sound within the medium, which would be crucial through the skull. So my colleagues at the TU Delft came up with the adaptive beamforming, which considers the variations of speed of sound by looking at the map of speed of sound and calculating the average speed of sound for each element and pixel. Element is part of the transducer, as you can see here. I will not go in detail, but I will be glad to answer any questions about that. The experimental setup that I have used is the Verisonics Vantage system. This was a breakthrough in transcranial ultrasound because it basically enables the research. It does so by giving the option to program the channels, up to 256 channels. And the channels, I also mean the elements of a transducer, of an ultrasound probe, right? That means you can turn on and off single elements of the transducer and send different kind of pulses from the transducer. The probe that I've used is called P41 probe. It has a center frequency of about 2.5 megahertz, which is quite common in transcranial ultrasound. It has a bandwidth of 1 to 4 megahertz and 96 elements in a row. The first method that I have investigated is called pulse echo signals. Here you can see such an element, and imagine now that with such an element we can send a pulse into the medium. It could be a slab, the skull. So we send this pulse it travels through the medium. At the interface, it bounces back and is received by the very same element again. And the time the pulse needs to travel through the medium is called time of flight. And based on the thickness of the skull and the time of flight, we can calculate the speed of sound of the medium. Now, of course, we want to measure the thickness and the speed of sound of the skull. That are two unknowns. And what do we have to solve for two unknowns? Two equations. And we can set up another equation easily with another element. That's here. And we know the spacing between the elements. This is a property of the transducer. And based on that spacing and this distance, you can calculate this distance. Based on the Pythagoras theory, we can set up an equation. We can equate both equations, solve for d, and we can calculate the thickness independently from the speed of sound. So did that, but it's of course more complex than that. There is also an acoustic lens on top of the ultrasound probe. Imagine it's a part of the house. And this acoustic lens is another unknown that I have to find out. But of course, these two materials have different speed of sound. Refraction happens. I also have to consider this. Now, if I plot these three approaches, I get a graph which looks like this. Here on the y-axis there is the distance, which means the thickness of the slab. I have here on the x-axis the elements, which are the east elements that I have used for the east equation. So here in blue, the first graph would be the very simple equation. Then that's where I consider the acoustic lens. And here I consider the refraction. And this measurement was performed with an 8mm slab, which is here. And we see that this equation where I corrected for the refraction is quite close to the ground truth. Okay, let's move on to the Lamb waves. That's the second principle that I have investigated. So, whenever you insanify a plate, any plate or slab, you generate Lamb waves. There are two basic modes of Lamb waves, asymmetrical modes and symmetrical modes. That's how the slab would look like if you look at it from the side. You can show Lamb waves in such a graph. Here on the y-axis you have the phase velocity, and there is also the frequency on the x-axis. Now, the first two modes which are generated are called zero modes. There's zero mode, symmetrical zero mode, and asymmetrical zero mode. They converge to the Rayleigh wave velocity, but with higher thickness of the slab and higher frequency, higher order modes are generated. They look like this. And you can read a lot from these modes. For example, this plateau here represents the longitudinal wave velocity. It's quite important. You have to remember that. And here they converge to the shear velocity. I will not go into that. So, most researchers, they only work with the first few modes here because it's easier to perform research. They only have to identify 1 or 2 modes. But in my case, I work with 8 mm slabs, which is quite thick, and 2.5 megahertz is really high. With such a high frequency and thickness, a lot of modes are generated. And you can see here it's really messy. You cannot identify the single modes. In fact, what you see here is the frequency here and the wave number here. This is a simulation of 8 mm slab of PVC and a 6.4 mm slab of PVC. So both have the same speed of sound. You cannot distinguish between the two simulations. But now, if I would do the same measurement simulation with same thickness of the slab, but different speed of sound of the slab, again, here you cannot distinguish between the modes, but here these are these quite distinct slopes. Now, if you identify the slopes and take the derivative from it, guess what you get? You get the longitudinal wave velocity. And I did this with various plastics like PEEK and PVC and polycarbonate. I did the measurements. In fact, what I did is I stamped with the first element of the probe. I measured with all the other elements the lamp waves. And because there is equal space in between the single elements, I could perform a two-dimensional Fourier transformation. And here again is the frequency and the wave number, and you can see it's quite distinct with the slope. And it gets even clearer once you plot the simulations on top of it. There is good correspondence between the simulation and the measurement. But of course, it did not work for a human volunteer. There it looks like this. What really is important to see is that there are only few modes present here, also for this slope here. So not a lot of modes can contribute to the slope. There's not a lot of interference happening in this area here. So either you have to increase the thickness, but you cannot do that for the human skull, or you have to increase the frequency. The third method I have investigated is called Algebraic Reconstruction technique. This is a tomographic approach. You have two transducers on each side of the skull, or in my case, I only work from experiments in a water tank. You have two probes on each side of a water tank. There's water in the water tank. And first, I perform an empty measurement. And then I put an object in it, and I perform the very same measurement again. And of course, there is a delay for certain element combinations. These element combinations are represented as rays. So for some of the rays, there is a delay compared in the two measurements. And I say these delays in a vector V. The appearance of the rays, I describe them in a system matrix A. And then we have the unknowns, which are the pixel values, X. And you can set up this equation system. But this equation system, it's huge. You cannot solve it by brute force. But what I've used is an optimization algorithm called taxmax. So I started with this approach. I'm not going into detail about that. I will be glad to answer any questions. Now I will show you how the art performs in action. So these are the first ways which are calculated. You can already see here it's somewhat of a circular shape because I limited the rays to this particular area. This would already be part of the, actually it would be the map of speed of sound we could use later. But really I have to limit the rays to this particular area. I could watch it all morning. So, yeah. But what is really important here that you have to limit this rays. You apply mask, in fact, that's what it's called. You have to limit the rays to this area. Otherwise, the rays would be all over the place and there would be no spatial information. You could not use the mask otherwise. I mean, this map of speed of sound you could not use otherwise. Now I will show really quickly how this map of speed of sound that I would generate with my results, how it could be used for the adaptive beamforming. Remember, the adaptive beamforming considers variations in speed of sound, and the commonly used delay and sum method does not. So the experimental setup consisted of a water tank with an ultrasound probe on each side. Somewhere there is in the middle an agar block with a needle in it. Here we can see the reconstruction with the delay and sum algorithm. This is the minimum this is another representation of this, the minimum intensity projection, that's how it is called. So, but what happens, what we did next is we inserted the PVC slab in front of the transducer. And what you can see is the object moved towards the transducer. Because these are two images which are interpolated, which are superimposed on top of each other. So, because there is a higher speed of sound here, which is not corrected for in the delay and sum algorithm, this object moves towards the probe, and this object also moves towards the probe. And here is the minimum intensity projection of this image. And here we see a reconstruction that we did with the adaptive beamforming. It considers variations of the speed of sound, and it knows that here there are the PVC slabs with a higher speed of sound. And what you can see nicely here is that the two images are really well aligned on top of each other, and the images are displayed on the correct location, which would be really crucial in fact for confirming the placement of the electrodes. This here is the minimum intensity projection of this image. So to conclude, the method based on full spectral signals can be used to measure the speed of sound and the thickness simultaneously. The method based on the Lamb waves can be used to measure the speed of sound independently from the thickness. The algebraic reconstruction technique really requires an accurate mask. And the adaptive beamforming type is correct for the aberration effects of the skull. For future work, I recommend to focus on the full cycle method if the existing setup have to be used, which was also a condition for my work. And with the existing setup, I really mean a transducer with a sample frequency of 2.5 MHz. However, if you would have access to another transducer, for example with 5 MHz sample frequency, I recommend to conduct a feasibility study based on the land rate. And I recommend to not put any more efforts in the algebraic reconstruction technique. So with that, I conclude my thesis, my presentation. I thank everybody who was involved in this work. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Simone, you want to start?
If you want, yes. Maybe you can go back to slide 8 where you present your first method.
Yes, of course.
Present the different. Okay. So can you just explain a little bit more how you got those results? How you did the measurements? So it's a pulse echo. So is it really from one element or one side of the transducer to the other, or is it how you really what
Yes.
the
Of course. Yes, this is in fact element 1 of one transducer, element 2 of the same transducer, and so on until element 96 of one transducer. And does this already answer your question? Or should I go more in depth? I'm not sure. I mean, what I did is I sent the pulse with that element, and I received it with that element, and with that element.
Okay, so you took.
So I have 2 time of flights which I can use. But there's always the time of flight for the first element considered. So I send a set and receive the set and receive the set. And this already allows to have 2 time of flights theoretically and set up 2 equations. And I did the same again with the next element. I send it with the first element, I receive with the first element, but I also receive with the third element, for example. These are all also again 2 equations which I consider. And then here, what I could do is I calculated with the equation system, for example, using element number 30, and then I got a value of approximately 14 millimeters.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Then you had this example at the end where you showed the different, I don't know the slide numbers, one of your last slides where you show the different images, ultrasound images, yeah, this one. So how did you correct them in image F? Is it what you present in your thesis? You have this possibility to manually adapt the 2 images that they correctly overlap? Did you apply this here then, or did you correct for it somehow automatically?
I assume that you are referring to another part of my thesis where I implemented the dual transducer setup with the Verisonic system. but this is based on the reconstruction of the delay in sound. And the adaptive beamforming, I did not come up with that. What I did is I only produced the map of speed of sound. That was my part, and I gave the map of speed of sound to my colleague, Moin, and he performed these reconstructions. I was asked to also show these results because it runs off the presentation nicely and really shows the importance of correcting for the aberrations. But I did not produce this image. So it is not related to the GUI that I have programmed with the Verisonic system. It's not related to that. But I spent really 2 months to set up this GUI, but it only works with delay and sound.
Then might be to get an impression of, because I don't know really the system. So you have those 3 methods, and how much did you have to implement yourself to do the analysis of the different methods?
I implemented a lot. Almost everything. But it's also not, sometimes it's harder to do, sometimes it's not, because there are also functions provided by MATLAB. And for example, the 2-dimensional Fourier transformation is a function provided by MATLAB. I used it and I refer to it in my report. But I did a lot, and there are different, of course, my colleagues helped me with tips and tricks, because there are, they just helped me. Yeah, sometimes I did a lot of programming work. A lot of work was put into just loading data and doing the measurements and write the proper script. But in the end, I also used a lot of MATLAB codes. But in the end, I spent on all 4 methods about 2 months, including these 3 methods. And what I did not show here, what I just explained to you, the implementation of the delay and sound with the Verisonic system.
And then in your report you mentioned that it's in the background that the aim is finding, or one application would be to use it to localize the brain stimulation electrode. And then you mentioned that it has been shown that the temporal bone, the thickness varies with age.
Yes.
So that it, I think in one sentence it says it decreases, and somewhere it increases, but I think it decreases, no? So would this mean then that if you have elderly people, it would be even better, or the method is even more promising because they have a lower thickness and there's less absorption of it?
The papers that I have read are mainly referring to the bone density, and that's what is crucial. And the temporal bone, it does not consist of cortical bone and trabecular bone. If it would be even hard to perform transcranial ultrasound. Cortical bone is the really dense bone, and the inner and outer part of the bone, and in between there is the sponge bone. But the temporal bone really consists of only cortical bone, and it actually is nice to have the dense bone rather than have a sponge bone or a weak bone, where like a lot of trabecular material would be present and maybe a lot of blood. So that's really what matters, the bone density, which it decreases with elderly women. And this is a patient group which has to be considered whenever you perform transcranial ultrasound.
then have you tried, I mean, you've sent you this phantom.
Yes.
How does it look like? Did you see some images? How could this help you in further developing that?
Right. I received the Phantom produced as a bachelor thesis by Fabian here, and we were really happy with the Phantom. It looks great. We performed one measurement only so far. That's also the reason why I excluded it from my report, because I don't want to make any conclusions with only one measurement, right? But it looks great. It was kind of hard to conduct the first few measurements because I didn't know how to handle it or how to work properly with it. It's like the first steps with anything, right? It's kind of hard to do. And yeah, so far that's all I can say about it.
I'm curious to see you now.
Yes, of course, I will keep you updated. I'm also still in contact with Moin, who is still working with the Phantom.
And then back to one more question. The setup of your measurements with the two transducers. Somewhere you say that you estimate or you suppose that they are in parallel, that they're really aligned.
Mm-hmm.
How precise do you think this setup is, and which influence, or how big is the influence on your measurements?
I think you're referring to this.
Yeah, exactly.
I would say that this setup is rather accurate because it has these really nice rails, and I would say it's rather accurate. Thing is, I was asked to perform a feasibility study and also to not perform any statistical analysis. Honestly, I was rather how to say, worried. I was rather worried with the electrodes themselves, with the probes themselves, because the probes they break with age, and the single elements they break, and they have decreased sensitivity. So I was much more concerned with that than with the actual measurement. I would say I mean, I confirmed that they are always parallel towards each other, and whenever I performed an empty measurement, I could also investigate that they are parallel. I actually measured it. I actually wrote a script for that. What I did is I sent a pulse with this element, and I received with this element, and I did the same for all the element combinations. And also for this element, I sent the pulse, and I sent for this element the pulse. And of course, it's a kind of flight between this element and this element and this element and this element. It's the same. And then I concluded that they are parallel. So that's what I did.
Thank you.
So when you're talking about sensitivity here, it's sensitivity to the intensity of the wave, not there's no like time shift or phase shift.
No.
No. With aging. So the time is always consistent.
Yes.
With the aging.
Yes. Yeah. Usually a signal to look like this, but with the broken element it's much more, right? But whenever I was able to see or to measure the signal properly, I was also able to calculate the time of flight correctly. And I did not even, what the rather is the problem is the sensitivity is too small to identify the pulse. So to say, it's if the signal noise ratio is high, then I was not able to measure the pulse, and therefore I was not able to calculate time of flight. That was really the problem that I was facing.
Okay.
That's it.
I'm the new research expert here, so I have a couple of questions that have to do with real world applications.
Of course, please.
You have a very nice model, like every model is specific edge of the real world. This is not a defect, it's just the way it is. And you have talked about the skull as if it were a homogeneous slab. Of course, you already mentioned that it's not necessarily homogeneous, and that's one thing to do, but it's also not necessarily a slab. In two ways. First of all, the thick is not the same. As you go along the stone, you can detect it all. And second, the head is not a box. In some places it's more spherical, there is a curvature. When I see the wavelength of the land waves in the order of a millimeter or a fraction of a millimeter, the head curves like this, so that can become relevant determining distances to things. So number one, there's no slab nature of the skull. And then second, what's inside is not homogeneous. You have different substances in the brain. You have the cerebrospinal fluid, which is more or less water. You have the gray matter, which is biological tissue, and you have the white matter, which is more or less the same biological tissue, but with more fat in it. The speed of sound is different in all of these things. So if you pretend that the speed of sound is constant, you end up with inaccuracy. If we use something in the operating room, we want to make sure the electrode is implanted with accuracy of about 1 millimeter if you take all of the source of error. So the source of error in a technique like this would have to be, the magnitude of error would have to be sub-millimeter. So how do these non-natural aspects of the model affect the accuracy? What do we have to do?
First, let me say that we are really concerned to improve the state of the art. So what really matters for us, and we already discussed that while we were discussing to publish a paper, what really matters is how much better are our images compared to the present state of the art. We could already show that it is better. We did not publish the results yet, but we are on a good way to do that. So
this is the first step in the incremental process of improvement.
Yes, of course. Of course, there are just inhomogeneities as well in the skull as well in the brain. In the brain, the differences between the gray matter and the white matter is very small. So what we are really what we wanted to address first is where high differences in the speed of sound are present. That means between the brain in general and the skull. That's why we made this assumption first.
Ventricles.
Ventricles.
The water in the ventricles. Deep inside the brain.
Yes.
Next and final question. These days you can do different things with ultrasound. You can use it to measure, but you can also use it to destroy tissue. This is not the topic of the lecture. I don't want to be there. There's the focused ultrasound technique, which is advertised and is used as an alternative to deep brain stimulation. You shoot ultrasound when you think to the brain to destroy tickets and target in very precise way.
Yes.
The people who do this say they have already achieved millimeter accuracy because it's not good. People do that in the food. And they do this, using special algorithms to correct for the thickness of the skull to make sure that the ultrasound waves arrive at information. So the fact that this thing exists leads me to ask the question, has your problem already been solved?
Thank you for the question. This is actually a good question. I read several papers. There are several algorithms that already can correct for the aberration effect of the skull. And sometimes they are invasive, and then they mention that this is invasiveness of the method is a disadvantage. But sometimes it only requires a huge amount of computational resources. And that's something they oftentimes don't mention. And our approach is able to correct for the aberrations effects in one setting. First, we would measure the thickness of the skull to my methods. And in the meantime, the patient could go home and we would compute the level speed of sound. But this would take approximately 4 days. And then the method can be used in real time. Now, what you mentioned with focused ultrasound is completely other approach than performing deep brain stimulation. I don't know about the advantages and disadvantages of these two probes methods, but I imagine that deep brain stimulation still has value.
Oh, I think so.
Yes, of course.
But that wasn't
the focus, the focused ultrasound will not replace deep brain stimulation.
But I only mentioned it for the light focus.
Yes.
But I mentioned it because they also have to address the problem of localizing the side of it used to be slant. So. Further questions? Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Nico, do you have some more questions?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you for the presentation, Claudio.
You're welcome. Thank you.
One of the questions was about the alignment of your two transducers. And so basically, I think that there are two issues. So when the two transducers have a parallel plane, scanning plane, so the planes coincidence,
Yes.
that's one. The other one is in plane itself. I think in plane itself it doesn't, well, you can resolve that, you answer that. But I was wondering if, caused by aberration of the skull, that these two planes are not parallel anymore.
Yes.
Is that a problem?
Yes, certainly it is a problem. I suggested in my report that one thing that for future work could also be that we have something that really, for clinical applications, that we really have something like a helmet, which really ensures that the probes are parallel towards each other. Because certainly this really matters.
They can be parallel, but the planes inside the brain, because of the aberration and difference in thickness left and right, well, you get a itself.
Yes.
So that in the brain itself, the planes are not parallel anymore.
Yes.
So what is acceptable in terms of deviation? Is that, did you do calculations on that? Or?
I did not any such calculations.
Yeah.
Honestly, I was not really. It was part of my thesis to do a feasibility study, and I was not worried with accuracy too much. What I can say is that the accuracy with the adaptive beamforming is about 1 millimeter.
Yeah, that's another point. The last question I have is about your 5 megahertz approach. That's really something. Of course, we want
Yes.
that would be new for brain imaging, because even 2.5 megahertz is already high.
Yes.
For current brain imaging. Do you think that's feasible? 5 megahertz?
Usually in literature for transcranial ultrasound, 2 up to 4 megahertz is reported. And of course, with higher frequency, the penetration is lower.
Yeah.
And so I would say it is rather not possible to perform transcranial ultrasound with 5 megahertz. But the point I wanted to make with the 5 megahertz is only to use the 5 megahertz probe to perform the approach based on the Lamb waves.
Okay, I see.
So first you would have to measure or conduct the Lamb wave method with a 5 megahertz approach, my 5 megahertz transducer, and then you would have to switch the probes, of course, to perform transcranial ultrasound.
Yeah, I see. Yes. Yeah. By the way, with focus ultrasound, the frequencies are much lower. So to achieve a 1 millimeter accuracy, that is for focus ultrasound really a challenge.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Nico.
Good, thank you very much, Nico.
Okay.
Nico, I will have
Bye, guys.